This UAS tutorial video is brought to you by AmericaView, a nationwide consortium for remote sensing education, research, and geospatial applications. This project was supported by a United States Geological Survey grant, and its contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the USGS. Mention of trade names or commercial products does not constitute their endorsement by the U.S. government. Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of our 5-part video series on using small unmanned aircraft systems to assess rainwater harvesting potential for urban multifamily housing. This part of our video series is titled UAS Laws and Regulations, and in it we'll discuss some of the various rules and regulations one must follow when utilizing an unmanned aircraft system in research. When deciding to use a UAS in research, there are many different rules that need to be strictly followed or else the operator might find themselves in significant legal trouble. Unfortunately, many of the rules are tricky to follow, so a strong understanding of how they work is necessary before any flight missions are able to be conducted. For this video, I'll discuss two main topics. The first being FAA and UAS laws in general. Then I'll go into specifically what Part 107 is and its associated rules. I'll then finish with an explanation of the test procedure required to obtain your commercial license. Under current federal laws in the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration regulates and provides guidance in the safe operation of small unmanned aircraft systems within the national airspace system. These regulations and requirements are found in Part 107 of Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Most of you watching this video are probably already aware of Part 107, as it has increasingly become the common term for the general regulatory framework that governs small unmanned aircraft systems. This is oftentimes why you hear the phrase Part 107 pilot or Part 107 license in reference to UAS pilot licensing. The specific section within Part 107 that discusses the remote pilot certification process is found under Subpart C. In addition to all the rules and regulations put forth by the Part 107 framework, all UAS operators are required to be fully aware of all state and local laws. This is an extremely important caveat to follow because local ordinances are increasingly being created to discourage UAS flights in public areas, such as city and state parks. Also, awareness of local airports is needed by the UAS operator before any flights are to be conducted. Typically, UAS operators are aware of the more commercialized airports, but sometimes there can be small private airports nearby that need to be taken into account. Fortunately for operators, there are many smartphone applications and websites available now that can provide the operator with important information regarding local airports or no-fly zones. Tools like these can be invaluable when considering the risk involved when flying a small unmanned aircraft system in an urban environment with high amounts of air traffic. When looking at the various rules put forth by Part 107, the best way to consider which rules might apply to you is to first make a distinction between flying for fun, which are the hobbyist rules, and flying for work, which are the commercial rules. By making the distinction between these two categories, it is much easier to understand which rules need to be followed. Fortunately, most of the rules dictated by Part 107 are the same for both hobbyist and commercial uses, but there are a few differences. The primary difference between the two is that commercial uses require a Part 107 remote pilot license, also known as a remote pilot airman certificate. This license is an absolute must-have for any UAS operators interested in commercial or semi-commercial endeavors. And the reason I even mentioned semi-commercial is that due to the regulatory framework currently in place, there are some regulatory gray areas that can have the UAS operator confused if their project falls under hobbyist rules or commercial rules. Therefore, if there is any doubt that your project might be considered commercial, then it is better to be safe than sorry and just go ahead and get your remote pilot airman certificate. Looking at the rest of the guidelines and rules, most of them pertain to primarily common sense flight practices. However, there are a few that are less common. These rules include, but are not limited to, the UAS must weigh less than 55 pounds, it must be registered if it weighs over 0.55 pounds, the operator must maintain visual line of sight with the drone during the entirety of the flight plan, the UAS must yield to other manned aircraft in the vicinity, the operator must be aware of all airspace requirements and surrounding obstacles, the UAS cannot be flown above 400 feet, the operator must seek approval to fly within 5 miles of any airport. The UAS cannot be flown over groups of people, stadiums, or sport events. the operator cannot conduct flights at night, and lastly, the operator cannot fly the UAS while under the influence of alcohol or drugs. All of these requirements sound relatively simple at first, however, do not underestimate their significance or their seriousness. With greater regulatory scrutiny being applied to the UAS community in recent years, it is the remote pilot and control's responsibility to see that all of the rules are being properly followed. In instances where a flight mission cannot be conducted under the current Part 107 framework, then the FAA does offer an alternative approach. This approach is via the Part 107 waiver application process. The FAA currently offers UAS pilots the option to apply for a waiver via their website to allow for flights that are otherwise impossible in the current regulatory framework. Examples would include missions that need to be conducted at night or over crowds of people. There is no definite list of what the waiver covers, since its overall goal is to provide the opportunity for approval of unusual flight conditions. It is generally recommended to apply for your waiver several weeks to several months before you want to conduct the flight mission. Now that we have discussed the various rules and regulations related to UAS operations, we will now briefly discuss the actual procedure for acquiring your Remote Pilot Airman Certificate, also known as your Part 107 license. In order to obtain your Remote Pilot Airman Certificate, you must first meet all the listed requirements. These requirements include you must be at least 16 years old, you must be proficient in English, you must have stable physical and mental conditions, and most importantly, you need to pass the initial aeronautical knowledge exam. This exam is created by the FAA and administered at an FAA-approved knowledge testing center. The exam itself is composed of 60 questions, which you will have 2 hours to finish, and you must obtain a score of at least 70% to pass. The contents of the exam include, but are not strictly limited to, your knowledge of all applicable UAS regulations, all airspace classifications and associated operational requirements, aviation weather sources and weather-related effects on UAS performance, emergency procedures, radio communications procedures, airport operations, crew resource management, and other related topics. At first, this list can seem rather daunting. However, there are plenty of study resources available for free through the FAA on their website. Once you have taken your initial aeronautical knowledge exam and passed it, then the rest of the process is rather simple and straightforward. You will then need to complete the FAA's Form 8710-13 using the electronic FAA Integrated Airman Certificate and/or Rating Application System, also known as IACRA. The form will basically ask a variety of relevant questions and then ask for your 17-digit Knowledge Test Exam ID, which can take up to 48 hours from when you pass the exam to show up in IACRA. So give it a couple of days after you take the exam before trying to fill out the online form. Once the form has been completed, submitted, and processed, then a permanent remote pilot certificate will be sent to the applicant via mail. This license will remain valid for 2 years, and then you'll need to take a recurrent knowledge exam to renew it. Now that you have passed your initial aeronautical exam and have received your Remote Pilot Airman Certificate, you are good to conduct all permitted commercial operations with your UAS allowed by the FAA. And since we now have a strong understanding of all of the relevant regulations and laws, we will then move on to our next part of the series, Part 3. Part 3 of the series is titled Image Collection with UAS, and will essentially cover the basic methods used to collect aerial imagery for mapping purposes. Since we are concerned with rooftop rainwater harvesting potential, this next part will be a vital step in creating the highly accurate maps that are needed for the measurements. The first topic we will discuss is the flight plan creation process. Then we will go over some of the optimal settings and conditions. And lastly, we will discuss what to be aware of when actually conducting your flight mission. Thank you for watching.